Thank you.
Hi, we're live, it looks like. I'm Randy Picker, as you probably guessed, both from my presence here and then the fact that some of you have been watching quite a bit of me. I had a tweet exchange with someone last night who has been binge watching me. So I hope this works. This is both live and will be recorded, so you'll have a chance to watch it at your leisure if you're so inclined. We've done these in other University of Chicago MOOCs, so we thought we would try this format here and see what works and doesn't work. So we'll iterate on this, though I gather we've been pretty happy with how these have worked in some of the other MOOCs that we have run. You know, I should say in that regard, I guess that you know, this is all sort of an experiment, and from our perspective, the University of Chicago perspective, I was on, maybe still am on, the university committee in connection with this, and this is our 5th MOOC, but first at the law school. So let me talk about a couple of things first, and then there was a question that we had, a discussion that we had posed to pre-populate that. We're still showing this as disabled, so I'm not quite sure what that means. I don't know if that means we have to able it somehow. We're struggling with the technology a little bit. What, John Wilson, he got rid of it. I don't know. So one of the discussions that's been pretty active on the discussion list for the course is the on-demand feature and all of the issues associated with that. I should say that I'm not sure we have any better window into Coursera, to be honest, than you do. So one of the things that's been our experience, that's maybe productive. One of the things that's been our experience of this is precisely that you're working with something that's sort of evolving in real time. And so John Wilson is here, who's one of our research assistant. Say hi, John. Hello. Right there for the MOOC and for my what else I'm doing this summer, and then Reggie's here in the background monitoring the computer. As we were heading towards finishing this course, you know, each day we would come in and work on it, and you weren't quite sure what the platform was going to look like. And that's the nature of, you know, early stage products and things that are changing. And so, you know, we just have to live with that, and that's what you're experiencing as well. The one feature I guess I would point to in particular that seems to be causing some confusion is the idea of deadlines in an on-demand course. And I think that those deadlines, I think they're resettable. I certainly reset mine. So I was being told by the system that I was behind on the course.
Reggie, I'm gonna try to type a chat and see if we see it.
We're gonna do a test here. Reggie's gonna type some.
Can you see like it's a forward to the left?
Yeah. So we have it. We have something here. The question is, are we actually? So if you type something, Reggie, we'll see if we're seeing what you're typing here. That was the idea, which seems like a good idea. So so we're you know, seeing those changes as you are. Oh, I was talking, I guess, about the deadlines. I think the idea behind the deadlines, and that has changed while we were working with it, was to you know, sort of prevent people to say, oh, maybe I should pay attention to this. I don't think those deadlines really otherwise mean anything, I think. Though I say everything with a certain note of caution, since I'm not quite sure what I'm understanding and what I'm not understanding. All right, but I adjusted the deadlines for me. I suspect you can do the same for you if you find that useful to do. You may be able to turn them off entirely. If you type something, we didn't see it. So then the second issue that I wanted to talk about was a question that I think it's Paul Olivier posed. And it was a good question about, well, how does what you're seeing in the course compare to what you would experience in a live law school course? And I can talk about my sense of how that works. And then John, who's just finished his first year of law school and is heading into his second year of law school, John can talk about that as well a little bit. And he's taking the course basically as he's also serving as sort of a TA for the course. So he's got a really good perspective on that. So I teach 2 different types of classes at the law school. So we have courses and seminars. I teach a seminar in technology policy. I have each of the last years, and if you Google that, you'll find the syllabus for that. The design of that course reflects a couple of notions that our students should get up and talk on their feet. That's an important skill for a lawyer, whether you're talking to a judge, a jury, or in a boardroom or wherever. It's being able to communicate successfully and effectively is I'll say it's a life skill, but it's certainly a skill lawyers should have. And then the second part of that is that I think they ought to work in groups. The real practice of law is not one man or woman sort of off on their own, but rather is lawyers working in teams together. So I try to create a group structure. So they do group presentations on tech policy topics at the end of the quarter. But what we do before we get to that point typically is we read interesting recent books in the tech space. We read Frank Pasquale's The Black Box Society last year. That's a big data book. Frank is a friend of mine. But Frank sees the world differently than I do. But that's part of the reason to read the book. So to talk about it is to make sure my students are seeing a wide perspective on it. We also read Hate Crimes in Cyberspace, which is basically on revenge porn and topics like that by Daniel Citron. And then we also read, all these books are right here, The Eureka Myth by Jessica Silby, which is sort of a copyright book. And what we do in there is we blog about those. My students blog about those. So the schedule is basically half a book a week. Half of the students blog about it on Monday, half blog on Wednesday. The Wednesday people have to respond to the Monday posts. And then we talk about all that class Thursday. In this case, we had each of the 3 professors who wrote these books appear via video call in the course. And that was really great. But I guess what I would say in that context is my goal is to have a great discussion. I don't go into a seminar with any conception of what I think the material is that has to get across, and so I don't. Yeah, we're struggling with Q&A. But if you're seeing questions?
I'm not seeing questions.
All right, so we're still struggling to see live questions. Someone out there type a live question into the Q&A app so that we can see if we're seeing that. I don't think we're seeing those. But to go back to the seminar then, my goal in a seminar is to have a great conversation, and there is absolutely no notion that there's a body of material that I have to get across. I don't know where we're going. I don't have a place to get to. Sometimes I joke that in the perfect day of the seminar, I would sort of walk out 2/3 of the way in and no one would notice. I don't really quite feel that way. But it's really about student discussion. That's a seminar. Classes for me quite different from that. So the syllabi for the 3 courses that this course draws upon, my antitrust class, my network industries class, my copyright class, those are all online. So if you search, Picker antitrust syllabus, I suspect you'll find it pretty quickly, or Picker network industries syllabus, you'll find it pretty quickly. And I don't use a textbook right now in any of those courses. So all the materials are actually available for downloading, the readings for the course, as are the slides. But those are classes in which, day by day, and the syllabus covers the entire quarter, so you can see what we're going to do. I have a bunch of stuff I want to get across, but I do not lecture. And I don't necessarily go through the slides. And I certainly don't go through the slides in a simple linear pass. Don't do any of that. In contrast, and maybe we'll let Wilson talk here for just a second, law school classes traditionally are done Socratically, as we put it. which means when I will call on a student, we do what's called cold calling at the law school, which means I pick a student at random, and that person does not know, but they are going to be called upon. When I call on someone, and I teach only second and third year classes, law at the United States is taught as a post-undergraduate education for 3 years, not done as an undergraduate basis. When I call on someone, my first question to them is, did you read the material for today? Almost inevitably, the answer to that is yes. Thankfully, our students are great here, hardworking, smart, well-prepared. Occasionally, I get a no, and then we engage in a ritualistic shaming ritual briefly, because, the students, you have let down the community when you have not done the reading. That is how we should all feel. We all have a job to do to participate in this collective process that is education. But then I start asking the person questions. I ask the person questions about the case that we've read. It's almost always cases, though sometimes we've got statutes as well. I'll ask the person to tell me what was, not necessarily just tell me all the facts of the case, but sometimes I'll do that. Certainly in first year classes, do lots of that. And then I'll ask a question, and that person will say something, and then I'll make that person's neighbor engage with that. And I typically have a group of 3 or 4 students on a particular topic that I'm talking to at a particular time. Obviously, other people can volunteer and jump in, but it's this back and forth process that's the essence of that education, where it's a dialogue between, what is effectively this group of 5 people that have been pulled out of my antitrust class, let's say 120 people at a time. And that's what that consists of. When I tell people what the Socratic method does, I mean, the joke about it is it's how I joke about American baseball. I say American baseball, which I'm fairly critical of, I say is a game in which you take 15 minutes of action and you spread it out over 3 hours. That doesn't sound very exciting. And you might say the same thing about the Socratic method. There's a lot of wasted time. That's not true at all. Figuring out why an answer is wrong, figuring out why an answer is interesting but wrong, why it's not quite right. I think the law is highly nonlinear. And so that's that process of exploration that I think is at the heart of legal education. And I don't know that you're getting that here. So I think what we have here is a third thing. So I don't lecture as such, or I do very little lecturing in my law school classes, a little, right? So if I want to lay out some economic concepts, so depending on where you are in the course, I have these things which are clearly economics at some point. I don't do those Socratically. I may call on people and talk through them. So the standard setting, extensive form games that show up in the smartphones week, if you've gotten that far. I can talk those through with someone and sort of educate that one person live and then ask other people in the room. Wilson, how does that match with your understanding of what you did last year?
So that's very consistent. As far as the differences between this type of course and a live law school course, I'd say there are 2 main differences. The first being basically what you talked about, the difference between a live in-class environment and taking a course online. I think especially the Socratic method at a law school is a unique experience. And an
intimidating experience?
A very intimidating experience. Yeah. I mean, some people, are more intimidated than others, and some people will, count down the days since their last cold call and sort of, dread the day that they'll get called on, or
I see. That's interesting.
Read extra carefully on the day that they think,
And do you guys detect patterns in being called on?
Yeah, a lot of professors will say, oh, you're from Missouri. In this case, was decided in the Missouri Supreme Court. I'm going to pick on you today.
I see. That's interesting.
So maybe I would read a Missouri Supreme Court a little bit more carefully.
That's very funny.
But it requires you to be ready to go basically every day. I might have to speak in front of 100 people today at 8 o'clock. So
and you don't want to look stupid.
no, you don't want to look stupid.
Just don't want to look stupid. That's just the honest thing to say.
No,
I was a law student. You don't want to look stupid.
Yeah, that's the that's the motivator, because you're not graded
No.
on your in-class
Absolutely not.
participation. But you don't want, you know, all of your classmates to think you're an idiot.
Why is this guy here?
But everyone's felt like that once.
No question.
Everyone's had one terrible cold call, and then everyone's also had one that went really well. And you know, everyone says good job.
Yeah, exactly. I went to law school here, and there are still people who teach here who I had for classes, and yeah, I can remember some good days, and I've tried to forget the bad days. There's no question about that. So, and the other thing about being a lawyer is, you know, what I tell students is the answers are easy. The answer when you're a lawyer is your client wins. What's hard sometimes is explaining why that's actually right? And what I really mean by that is it would be perfectly fair for me to call on a student, have them give an answer, and then immediately say to that same student, now tell me why that's wrong, right? Because that's in some sense the essence of being a lawyer. I mean, I don't want to say that there are no answers. I actually think there are answers. And I've tried to do answers in the MOOC. But I also think that part of what law school teaches is a certain mental flexibility and an ability to see things from multiple positions. I think that's an important life skill in truth. I think being able to see, you know, if I were on the other side of this issue, how would I see it? I think that's actually really important to do if you're negotiating with someone, right? In business, you want to make sure you understand how they're seeing it, so you can then figure out how to respond to that or manage that or any of those things. I think law school is actually quite good for that. And then the other thing, of course, about law school, though that's not different from the MOOC, is so many great issues. I think that's true of the MOOC as well. So what I think is, you know, then, so if you ask me what I'm doing here, then I say, for me, it feels like a third kind of teaching. It's not the seminar. The seminar, I've got no place to go. We're going to talk and have a great discussion. That's like almost a dinner party. But again, on great important issues. In a class, yeah, I've got material I want to cover. And depending on the class, I've got some stuff which I felt like if I didn't do it, I've you know, I haven't accomplished what I'm supposed to accomplish. You take a class based on a detailed statute from me, you should come out knowing the statute. We can do a lot better than that, but you should know the statute. Statutes are going to change. Just knowing the statute's not what it means to be a lawyer. But you can't participate in the game at all if you don't know the statute. That's just sort of like table stakes to get in. So we try to accomplish that. But we need to also inculcate a much greater mental flexibility and an ability to see things in many ways. You know, the MOOC, when I've gotten some very nice tweets about the MOOC, and you can tweet me at Randy Picker, and those are unbelievably gratifying, I have to say. Some very, very nice tweets. You know, the building the MOOC was basically standing in a dark room and talking into 2 cameras. You're not quite sure what you're doing. There were 4 people in the room, including Reggie, and I think we felt like day by day we were doing okay. But there's a certain uncertainty there as well, and it's nice to see that people are seeming to be finding it interesting and exciting and are learning a lot. I'll say if you really like this stuff, you should come to law school. I'll say that easily, because this is great, but law school is better. Okay, so that was by way of all that. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to some of the questions that we got on the discussion list that we asked for. So I'm going to see if I can do that. I went too far. So the first question was from Paul Olivier, which I think is a joke question. What will be the new chapters in the second version of the course? Yeah. So, you know, there will be no such thing. No, I don't want to say that. What I do want to, it is fun to think about what you might want to do. And we built a 7-week course because we thought that was a pretty good starting point. So I mentioned Frank Pasquale, sorry. And Frank and Siva had a thing on The Guardian in the last week. I was looking for Siva's books on Uber and Airbnb, and the extent to which they are complying with law, not complying with law, and how we should think about that. Uber and Airbnb are clearly interesting platform companies. I actually teach a class at our business school in the fall. I have, at least for the last few years. It goes back a while now. And we had actually a fabulous discussion last year, precisely about this question of, you know, how should companies, how should businesses think about complying with law? Should they say, oh, we're just going to violate the law, and they'll fine us, and that's just a cost of doing business, and we have to buy pencils, and we have to buy whatever we have to buy, and we just have to pay legal fines? Or should they have some sort of other obligation? Should Airbnb and Uber say, actually, look, what's going to happen here is we're going to enter these markets. These markets are artificially constrained. That's a capture story. We should have more cabs than we do, but the cab drivers have been very well organized, and that's controlled that, effectively creating an artificial monopoly. We're the good guys, not the bad guys. And when we roll out our service, people will recognize what a great service it is. And the law will then change. And so building in a very explicit dynamic vision of how law evolves, where they will then become a participant in the legal change, and where, you know, having all these users who love the service, they will become participants in that change as well. That's all, you know, those are great topics. Maybe more discussion topics in some sense than lecture topics. So that's one of the things you want to confront. Okay, so we are seeing some questions, even if not on the laptop I'm speaking into, but we'll deal with that later. I'll take that in just a second. So certainly those questions. So you could talk about Airbnb, you could talk about Uber, and so sort of some of the startup issues. Obviously, we don't really talk about privacy a lot in the course as such, as a direct topic. That's a really wonderful, important topic. I could easily see doing a week on privacy proper, and then folding that into some of the platform issues. So I think that's a topic you could easily spend a week on. So I think you know, you quickly come up with a list of topics you could do. One will have to decide whether that's a sensible approach or not. I'm going this way. Second question, all the issues discussed in this course follow a clear trend. They are becoming global more quickly. This is creating international tensions around the GAFA, that's Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, for instance, where it looks like the Europe is often placed in front of a fait accompli. What do you foresee as effective mechanisms to mediate this? So there's a couple things there. So let me talk about both of those. So it is you know, the scalability of businesses is certainly one of the defining features, seemingly, of these platform worlds and these virtual platform worlds. So how rapidly things can shift is you know, there's a I'm looking for my New York Times. Do you see the New York Times? No, I had the paper. I was reading it earlier. Is that today's New York Times? Just pull it. Yes, it is. So James Stewart has a really good column in today's New York Times on Microsoft's write-off of don't worry about any of that. Microsoft's writing off its $7.5 billion of its investment in Nokia, and I don't know if you can see all that. And just how rapidly those markets have shifted. Now, I would have thought Microsoft might have understood that market was shifting by the time they got there. So go back and look at the discussion we have in the smartphone discussion there. And you can see there was an internal controversy at Microsoft about what they were doing. But you're certainly right to say that these things go global very quickly. If the question is what can one do such that it's not already done when you get there? Well, that question might have two parts to it. One's sort of a business part, which is, you know, not for regulators to deal with, as it were. And then the other question is, what should regulators do? And I think what you're seeing is regulators who are increasingly sensitive to this and intervening earlier. So the notion, and I talk about this in the Music Week if you haven't gotten there yet, the notion that before Apple launched its new streaming service, that it was getting antitrust inquiries from seemingly both the United States and the European Union. At some level, you go, that's great. You've got a 0% share, they have business, there's an antitrust issue. And yet I think, as I say in the MOOC proper, I think it reflects exactly this notion you're talking about, which is this notion that things will transform so quickly that if you sort of act after they've, just even gotten going, if you've identified the right company, that's always hard to know which one that is, right? Then they're going to take off. Now, as I tweeted this week, the most interesting Google development this week is that they seem to be unbundling Google Plus from the rest of Google. And so the fact that you're a big dominant company in one field doesn't mean you'll necessarily be able to carry that over into adjacent markets. Sometimes you can, but we've got lots of examples of failure of that as well. Certainly the Microsoft Week, the Windows Media Player story is a story of failure in doing that. Google has tried this in the social space multiple times with Google Buzz, with Google Wave, and obviously with Google Plus, and still has not succeeded over there at all. All right, so we've got a new question. What do you think of the algorithmic transparency concept? So that's interesting. I'll say I'm a skeptic, I guess. So let me just talk about what that idea is a little bit, make sure we're all on the same page, and then I'll express skepticism. So the idea here is that, and Frank's book, and I plugged the book, but I'll plug again. Frank should be writing me a check for this. Black Box Society. Don't agree, but it's worth reading. The idea here is that we've got these giant companies, the internet giants, who have set up these black boxes which are making decisions about our lives. You might say, shouldn't we, as the citizens who are subject to that, have a right to know what's going on? So there's been a recent in the last 3 to 6 months, I lose track of time so quickly, involving Facebook, where Facebook seemed to be running a kind of experimentation on as it were us. Shouldn't they have been transparent about that? And then you might say the same thing. Part of the fight about Google is that we don't know what Google is doing. So when all of a sudden we see a change in the underlying technological structure, why are all of a sudden these Google reviews popping up? Shouldn't we require them to be transparent? So I think that raises some. Now we'll talk about privacy a little bit, and I guess I'll reveal my biases. So when I look at a corporation, I go, well, there's no corporation. What does that mean? What I mean by that is a corporation is just a piece of paper which organizes a collection of individuals. So for me, at least, I think of these collections of individuals as having, important rights, as it were, as well. So I'm not casual about, as it were, corporate free speech, corporate privacy, or the like. I very much want to see those through the lens of the individuals participating in those organizations. If I'm walking down the street and I avoid a guy who's wearing pink pants and a yellow shirt, I'm probably exercising my own algorithm in my head, and the question is, should this person have the right to insist upon me disclosing to him why I've in some sense shunned him? And I have I laugh. So I either shun this person or I go to the person and say, Sam, so nice to see you. Because there's a well-known professor at the University of Chicago who won a Nobel Prize who dresses exactly like that. Sam Peltzman, who I had as an undergraduate here and who I've gotten to know since then. And Sam studied for his PhD at UCLA back in the day. And apparently they were flashy dressers then, and Sam still is. So the last time I saw Sam on the streets of Hyde Park, he was wearing a lime green jacket. So that's all by way of saying I'm probably not going to move towards that kind. Me personally, you're just asking what do I think. I'm just telling you what I think. I'll also say it's a kind of thing I think I need to think about more. So, I'm not casual about the idea that ultimately these are not, in some sense, corporations. They are collections of people who have found the corporate form a useful tool. And the mere fact that they've decided to do that doesn't mean all of a sudden I should somehow strip them of the corresponding speech rights or privacy rights that they would have if we thought of them as, you know, should we have the right to stare into Randy Pitter's head? There's a second question. So I'm not seeing these. Okay. We got someone who finished law school in Denmark. Ida. Hi, Ida. What is the academic level of this course in comparison to law school? Okay, that's a good question. So let's talk about that. So there is no question that I absolutely try to bring people who don't know anything about law. And Ida, maybe you can post something on the blog, not the blog, but on the course discussion to tell us how you're experiencing it. I'd love to know that. But there's no question I pitched this in a way that I hope that non-law grads and non-lawyers would be able to understand it. And the nice thing about the filming setup was that with Reggie and then our two camera guys and audio guys in the room, they're not lawyers. And so my constant check with them was, did you get that? Was that clear? Did you understand it? So, no question that I am in that sense more outsider friendly than you know. I want to make sure people can participate. Okay. The other thing I will say is I you know, felt like I had space to do some things I might not do in a law school class. I can't tell. Maybe I should. So we worked through the Google PageRank patent and go through their algorithm there. I don't actually do that in class. It might be a good thing to do. I will say, really, this is perfect for that. Now I would probably say to my students, and one of the things that's going to be really interesting here is how doing this feeds back into what I do in class. Now I would say, go watch that. That's what I would say. And I think it would be great for them to go watch that. And so the idea that you would have some videos that sort of sit there that people could go watch and that you wouldn't necessarily explain in class, I see the virtue of doing that. Okay. But the academic level question. So it's sort of about the how fine-grained the discussions are. So the readings, for example, for the Microsoft week, the big reading for that week was the DC Circuit decision. I spend a whole day on that in my antitrust class. Now I talk through that, I think, in a greater level of doctrinal detail, and when I say talk through, Socratically in the way that John and I were talking about. But that's the reading. I mean, you know, so and the truth of the matter is in my class you would get an edited version of that. So in some sense it's a little more user friendly. Just link to it on Google Scholar. So I think that there's some missing detail and some missing, you know, granularity. So you know, there are a number of spots in this course where we would really have wrestled with some of the statutory definitions. So when you get to video materials, this question of, in the area case is a great example of this, probably not that far. There's a very complex copyright definitions that are relevant there. It wasn't obvious that's what the general audience needed to know. But if you were actually doing this in a law school classroom, wrestling with those pretty complicated definitions and pretty technical definitions would be what you would need to do. So I think this is representative. I think that's fair. And slightly more accessible in various points and a little less detailed. But the overall academic level, I mean, I think it matches it reasonably well. My goal in doing this class, as I would say to people, is I want it to be accessible to people who haven't gone to law school. Absolutely want to do that. But at the same time, I was hoping that I could accomplish it such that if a sophisticated person really sat down and watched me for 20 hours, they would go, oh, I learned a lot. And I don't know if I accomplished that. Some of this material that I've talked through here, for example, on the Microsoft, I gave as a talk, I don't know, 2 years ago, as some sort of, this or that lecture at the New York Bar Association. And even those people were involved in the Microsoft cases, they felt they seemed to be learning a bunch of stuff, and so that is my goal. Sophisticated and accessible is what I try to do. I hope I accomplish that. And in that sense, this is, the stuff I talk about on Google. I want to say I think that's right at the edge of what people know. So when I think the overall understanding of platforms in the class, it's easy for me to say, oh, it's at the highest level. That sounds so self-congratulatory, and I hate that. But I think it's pretty sophisticated, and I don't think it's generally well understood. That would be the honest thing to say to your question, I guess. But you should jump in and on the discussion list and tell us what your experience is. I would love to know that, and then how it compares to what's going on in Denmark. That would be terrifically interesting.
No further questions.
No further questions. Okay, so and we've talked for about 35 minutes. So I'm going to scroll back and see if there's anything else over here. Do I scroll down here? What do I do?
No.
Okay, so I think we're pretty much at a wrap. So Reggie, John, anything else?
I did have one question.
You have your one question. Yeah, go ahead. Tell us your question.
So my question, just after the first 2 weeks, sort of a general, maybe naive question about antitrust law in general.
Where Wilson knows nothing about it.
Yeah, I haven't had any courses.
He'll have a chance to learn all this next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So basically, just the type of behavior that got Microsoft in trouble, it got Google in trouble this week.
Yeah.
My first reaction was, I've seen this type of behavior before. Like, it looks familiar.
That's because you live in the cowboy American economy.
Yeah, my one example, I don't know if this is a good example, but when you go on ESPN.com, which is a popular sports website, they'll tell you, this, if you're looking at scores, they'll tell you this game is airing on ABC or this game is airing on ESPN.
One of their affiliates.
Right. But if it's airing on Fox,
Right.
As far as I know, they don't tell you this is airing on Fox. So my question was just, what attracts antitrust and competition scrutiny onto a company, other than just success?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and the ESPN example is a nice one. So let's talk about that briefly. So I think we'd say a couple things. I think we would say that the rules for companies that are dominant, if you like the European word, or that have market power, monopoly power, talking United States terms, are typically different than the rules for competitors. And the broadcasting market is actually shockingly fragmented in some sense by antitrust standards. So if you actually look at market shares for individual stations, at least, not necessarily aggregating those across companies or within a company, those tend to be pretty small. So something that might be perfectly legitimate behavior in competition is something we're going to be much more suspicious of in a monopoly context. Take the two examples from, as it were, weeks 1 and 2, or weeks 2 and 3, depending on how you're keeping score in Coursera. What Microsoft did vis-a-vis Netscape Navigator, seemingly, and this is something what the DC Circuit saw there, was to make a series of design decisions, none of which necessarily seem to have any pro-consumer benefits, in a way to lock Netscape. And then the simple question is should we allow a firm with their kind of monopoly, United States term, to do that? And the answer is no, and I think appropriately so, no. And that's sort of the question, the European Union is confronting on Google. So Google's market share on the desktop in the United States tends to hover in the 64 to 67% range. While, in Europe, it hits 90 in various markets. The difference between those two is pretty remarkable from my perspective. And so it's again, what are the rules of the road for a dominant firm? And I'm, I express a fair amount of skepticism if you've gotten this far about the actual Google shopping case the EU's brought. The general broader conception about concerns about Google's ability to leverage, especially in an undisclosed way, that goes to the transparency a little bit that Paul asked about before. I wouldn't, just in that context, I would require them, I think, if you're asking what I think, to like the FTC search engine guidelines, to flag that this is effectively an ad and is not something which is being determined algorithmically. That kind of notice is different than requiring them to tell us what the algorithm is doing. And so you want to make sure you see the differences there. That's part of. I used to say, I don't really say it anymore. I used to say that what we do in law school is to teach people to see shades of gray. That has taken on a different meaning over time, thanks to the success of 50 Shades of Gray. So I don't quite put it that way anymore. But to see really fine gradations, which can be really important, that's what law school does in particular. Sometimes I hear, and I am at the University of Chicago, very lucky to be here. And so I have great colleagues across campus. I will listen sometimes to world-class economists talk about law in a way that's incredibly untextured. First-year law students, by the end of first year, they don't make the same mistakes, as we would call them, that these brilliant economists sometimes make about law. And it's that ability to see those fine distinctions, which can be so important. That's law school does a lot of that. Is there something else? There we have two more questions. Reggie's going to flip his computer around.
And here's Ingrid's question.
Okay, so Ingrid's question, I just joined because I'm working on a lunch break, but I'm a rising high school senior applying to U Chicago this fall. Aha. How does this course compare to U Chicago undergrad classes? Well, so I'll say, boy, I have 3 kids, 2 of whom are college students here. And so I'll say I went here as an undergraduate. I met my wife here as an undergraduate. I'm a big fan. It's the only place I came here to go to college, and then I graduated from college early. So I decided to go to econ school. I'd always planned to go to law school. I come from a very middle-class background. There were 2 types of professionals I knew of, lawyers and doctors. I didn't want to be a doctor. So I had to be a lawyer. So I really had no idea what that intent meant. But I was going to go to law school. But I had some time, so I went to econ school first. I only applied to 1 econ school. I only applied to 1 law school. And I only applied to 1 law school for a teaching position. Though I did go, I clerked for a year, worked for a federal judge for a year. But I only applied to 1 federal judge, and that's its own issues in the sense that I've never actually gotten hired for a job where the complaint was my application hadn't gotten there soon enough because it had been worked out, and I was going to get hired if I didn't screw up, but I did need to apply. And then I practiced law for 3 years, and I'm a huge fan of practicing law. I really enjoyed practicing law for a firm that was then called Sidley & Austin, which is a big firm around the world. I really enjoyed practicing law. Okay. That's Ingrid, all but I still haven't answered your question. So what I would say is I hope what's coming across, and we've got 5 MOOCs, and I'll say go watch some of the other ones. I won't tell you to go watch John Cochran's MOOC. It's great, but it's really at a PhD in finance level. He starts with stochastic calculus. Go watch Peggy Mason's neurobiology MOOC. excuse me, Sarah Ray Stalinga's Urban Education MOOC, Archer's Global Warming MOOC. I hope what is coming across is what I think of as the essence of the University of Chicago, which is an intense engagement and excitement about great ideas. That's what I think. That's what I think is the essence of the University of Chicago. I think it's true across the entire campus. If I say that's what's distinctive about the University of Chicago, but you would say, well, how could that be distinctive? Every place that does that, not quite the way we do. We run a summer workshop series at the law school in the summer. I'm not aware of any other law school that does that. That is the way in which I think what you're seeing here is completely representative of the University of Chicago. I will also say on a more, as it were, personal level, if you send me an email, I can put you into touch with one of my kids or both of my kids who can tell you a little bit about what it's like to be an undergraduate here. I think they think they're getting a great education. So I highly recommend it. You should definitely apply. Thank you. A book has just arrived from Amazon. Aren't we all excited? I'm excited because I'm going to visit my father in St. Louis over the weekend, and I need to have some reading to take with me. So I needed that book. All right. Bob Taylor, do you think that the history of behavior of large media platforms such as Google had any bearing on the recent expansion of the Title II definition by the FCC to further control things that are internet? So I think so that's an interesting question. I think I don't know if you've gotten through the net neutrality materials yet. When you go through those, I think what you're going to see is the FCC has in some sense to behave like a cautious regulator in that space. In that, as you'll see as we work through, and the FCC materials, the net neutrality materials are pretty legalistic. And boy, you could have spent another hour of lecture time, video time, whatever, on other approaches. So, but I wanted to make sure people probably know a certain amount of net neutrality. I wanted to make sure they knew something about the law, and at least law in the United States. The legal authority they asserted there was narrow, and they wanted to try to control the space, but they didn't take initially it's based on ancillary jurisdiction. This is all going to sound law technical, and the DC Circuit says no, that doesn't work, and then they said, okay, well, we'll try 706, and the DC Circuit said no, that doesn't work. And so the breadth of the posture they've taken, I think, reflects two things. I think it reflects first that, as they've been working on this whole question for more than a decade, broadband has changed in the United States. So when the Brand X case starts, really, when they start regulating this question of cable ISPs, you haven't read any of this yet. You haven't watched any of this yet. Yeah. No, you'll get to it. We're talking about dial-up communications and narrowband, and so they want to not be in the way. And now, not to say we've reached some point of broadband nirvana in the United States. We have not. Everyone says, oh, we're not South Korea. We clearly have done better, and so I think they're more comfortable having a heavier regulatory structure, given the fact that the other efforts to regulate, as it were, through alternative paths have failed. And then they said, okay, if you say we have to go to Title II reclassification, that's what we're going to do. Couple that with the fact is, as it sounds like you probably know, Bob, I mean, their ability to forbear, as we put it in the statute, to say, okay, yeah, it's a common carriage, but here's how all the things that aren't going to apply, means that they've got a fair amount of flexibility to create a fairly tailored regime. But for those of you who haven't gotten to all that, you'll see that in the Net Neutrality Week. And I know from watching the stats, most people have not gotten there.
We have a question from Argentina.
A question from Argentina, okay.
Santiago says, I'm from Argentina, and my country is very difficult to insert in jobs for young lawyers. much more difficult to have access to internet and new technologies, law, and studies. And that's why I appreciate the course and the preparation of the professor. What is the reality of young lawyers in the USA and opportunities to study and find jobs related to these topics?
So the question, just to repeat that, is Santiago's from Argentina, talking about the difficulties of law and technology on the ground in Argentina. What are the opportunities for study in the United States? What is it like for young lawyers? And then what's the availability of various educational opportunities? So the honest thing to say is it's been a really interesting and tricky time in the law market in the United States since the Great Recession started. Applications to law schools are down considerably from their peak. Now, we sort of peaked heading into or at the start of the recession because graduating students said, oh, I don't want to go into that job market. I'll go to graduate school, law school. Yeah. You know, I will say, and John is getting ready to participate in OCI. Yeah, exactly. What do we think about, you know, what does this look like right now?
From what I hear, the market is better than it has been in recent years. People really, from what I've heard, weren't hiring much there for a few years.
Yeah. So I want to be just so we get it. Our figures are we try to be. Paul asked about algorithmic transparency. We're pretty transparent about how our graduates are doing with regard to jobs. And so if you go to the University of Chicago website, law school website, you'll find all that information. You know, we're transparent because we're doing well. And so it's easy to be transparent when the numbers look great. So graduates of the University of Chicago Law School live a very lucky life. They've worked hard to get here, and if all goes well, they're well educated. So I have a distorted perspective on that. There's no question, though, it's been trickier in this market, in the law market, since the Great Recession than it was 10 years ago. And there is this question of to what extent technology is changing the practice of law. Now, what I say to people is the law is not getting any easier, and there's not less of it. So if I say, does the world need smart, sophisticated, well-educated guys like Wilson? The answer is yes. I think that's right. And so I think if you're in the right spot in the market, it's you know, there will be opportunities because, you know, in these, especially in the markets we're talking about here, in my network industries class, you know, 1/10 of a percentage point can be worth tens of millions of dollars in these regulated markets. And so there's a lot to fight about. And there's a lot of extra value that a really smart person can bring to bear in those situations. So please go ahead.
Also, what you mentioned about how it is getting jobs in specific fields that you like or that you're interested in, maybe from this course. I know that I mean, in any job market, it looks really good to come in and say, I think this is really interesting. This is what I'm passionate about, as opposed to, you know, I'll do anything.
Right.
So that always helps if you're interested in particular things. So.
Right, and I will say, I think a course like this, this course, you know, I suspect there is no course. Well, I said this once, and I think it's basically right. This course is a pretty unusual course. So I gather that Jonathan Zittrain and Larry Lessig offered a version of a course like it at Harvard maybe a couple years ago. I don't think it quite covered the same thing. So Jonathan and I swapped some tweets about it, and that looked good, a little different. We've got 7 minutes and 2 questions. All right, we're gonna fill up the whole hour. The one thing lawyers can do is they can kill time by talking. Tell me what the questions are.
Paul has another question. He asks, what do you see as the future of the legal profession, especially regarding automation?
Yeah, I don't know. So I pay a little bit of attention to that space. And you know, the question is you know, I laugh. You know, how does changes in the law space with regard to technology, how does that compare to the overall question as to when the singularity is going to hit? And the singularity, if you don't know what that is I guess it's a Ray Kurzweil phrase, which is the point we finally build a machine that is smarter than human beings. Then whatever happens after that, we can't begin to guess, because we don't know how fast they're going to change and how quickly we're going to reach the point where Skynet takes over, right? That's sort of the question. So there's no question that there used to be a lot of in large litigation, there used to be a lot of things that happened with regard to documents and document production and discovery, which had been automated. Boy, is that a good thing for society as a whole? You bet, right? So does that mean that employs fewer lawyers? Probably. But that wasn't necessarily the best work you wanted to be doing. And so, you know, do I think we're going to see robo-brief writers? I don't think so anytime soon. But and the truth of the matter is, you know, while I have a powerful vested interest in having a world in which we need high-end lawyers, and I think we'll always have those, lawyers are a transaction cost. And, you know, the economist in me says if we can lower transaction costs, that would be a good thing. And certainly there are markets that are underserved by law. And if we could automate some of that, that would be to the good. One more question.
Raymond asks, can the U.S. government require Microsoft to split if Microsoft was a foreign company? If no, what will stop these giant companies from relocating to another country?
Well, so when you say to split, and relocate where, I guess is what I mean. So you know, the European Parliament passed something in which they were saying, oh, Google should be forced to unbundle. And then the question is can they deny you access to local markets? I don't know, that's not really what I do for a living, but my big picture conception on that is yeah, they probably have a lot of power to deny you access to those markets. And so if really what you want to do is sell to US consumers or sell to European consumers, then there's a way in which you're going to have to play by, abide by those local rules. So, and whether that means you have to virtually separate as opposed to physically separate, I don't know. But I don't think you can necessarily, if you actually want to be a seller in those markets, and that's what Microsoft certainly wants to do and what Google wanted to do. I mean, Google exited China to some extent, right? And that goes to, I think, it's almost a psychological explanation. I think my understanding is that Brin, I think it's Brin, has strong ties to Russia. I think family ties, and so was particularly sensitive to the censorship issues. And so that's an alternative. But most companies are not going to want to exit the European markets or exit the United States market. And exiting China is not the easiest thing to do either. Okay.
One final question.
One final question in 2 minutes.
And it's from Paul again. He
okay.
says, what products do you wish the smart minds in the Silicon Valley or elsewhere were developing in the area of law?
In the area of law? Well, what would I like to have? And if I knew the answer, Paul, I wouldn't tell you. I'd go do it, right? I don't know. I'd have to think about that. Yeah, I don't think I know. Okay, well, we did the hour. I want to thank people for their participation. Let us know on the discussion forum whether this was useful and interesting. Whether you say, oh, thank you, I've survived this and never again, or whether you say, I'd love to do another one of these in a week or two or whatever that is. Part of what I see as the virtue of this particular forum is precisely this idea of making it a little more interactive. And that's what I hope we accomplished here. So I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Reggie. I want to thank John.
Thank you.
I hope everyone has a great weekend. I'm going to try to stop the broadcast